and we will get started. Let's ask our Father to watch over us in our time and all that we need from our God. Father, we do thank you that you are here with us each moment through your Spirit. Lord, we just give this session to you. We pray that you'd watch over the technology and pray that you'd just give us your thoughts, your ideas, your direction, your wisdom, as we're seeking to do the work that you've called each one of us to do in the places that you've placed us in your world. I just thank you for my brothers and sisters here. Just pray your blessing on each and on our health and families and situations. And we just thank you, Father, that we can call you our Father. We're your children. We just put these things in your care. It's in your name, Jesus, we pray. Amen. All right. What I thought we would do today is just spend a little time in just kind of an open forum session. This is week 9. Last week and this week, if you're on schedule, and I know many of you are not on schedule just because of the issues of life. But we have been working on the research methodology chapter, and there can be some challenges there, I know. What I think I'll do then, let me just open it up to questions, comments, and as Dr. Henry or I or any of us would have a comment, we can just kind of share with each other openly today. Because I know a lot of this content is new if you've never really worked on, an in-depth research kind of process. And so we're all learning. We're all still learning, and that's a good thing. So let's go ahead and just spend some time. If anybody would just kind of like to start the discussion out with a question or a comment. I've got the template on my screen if we need to refer to any of these sections, and I'll do that. So go ahead. Anybody like to just start?
Hi, Dr. Payne. This is Felicia.
Hi, Felicia.
Felicia. Now, so I may have to leave as I indicated in an email earlier because I'm at a doctor's office.
Okay.
But what I wanted to, first of all, say thanks to you and Dr. Henry for your input and your guidance throughout these 9 weeks. I know this is our last Zoom room. So I just wanted to get that in and to say thank you very much. I really benefited from the discussions and the feedback. Coming into this session, I've been at all the Zoom rooms except for one. And what I've noticed, I heard Dr. Henry talking about the process and how things have changed. And I think I experienced it over the last 3 weeks, from week 6 till now, where my topic, as I continue to read, I found my whole main question moving from asking the question of what, to now asking the question of how. And I now have to go back from chapter 1 and tweak everything. So parts of my literature review, I'm still in the process of completing that, hoping to do that by the end of this week. In terms of the subtopics, I have the main theory as international migration, because I'm dealing with migration of women to the Caribbean and being able to access services here in the New York City area. In terms of the topics, so I have the main topic heading as international migration. However, the subtopics, would that be the other theories that I'll be looking at? Like, for example, the neoclassical or the networking theory, or would those be subtopics, or would just be a discussion discussing international migration? That was my most critical question as I contemplate the other pieces. Thank you.
I can give you my feedback on that, and then Dr. Henry or others can give their feedback. As you've said, the migration of women from the Caribbean area to the U.S. is kind of your main topic. State that again in terms of the question. Put that into a question form again for me.
What social structures, I don't even have it on me right now. um, I don't have all the words
No,
because I'm on
you can
board.
just paraphrase
Yeah.
it for me.
But
Yeah.
what I'm dealing with, how what social structures are available, and how women who've recently migrated to the US can access those services. What I'm focusing on is the gap between what is out there, what is available, and people knowing about it and accessing it. And I'm hoping to use support groups in churches within this area to bridge that gap where they can reach out to their congregants and people who have newly migrated to the US to access those already available services. I'm not creating a new structure, but just letting people know, okay, there's something there, and creating a network and a support system for these newly migrated women.
Okay. Your assumption then is that there is a problem, right, with the social services for new immigrants from the Caribbean area. Would that just be an assumption, or are you going to try to prove that that is indeed an issue as you talk with women and et cetera?
Yes, well, I'm hoping to prove that there is, number one, what the needs are, identify what those needs are,
Okay.
and then to see what services are available to meet those needs and how available they are to them, how if they know about it.
Okay, yeah. So the main question is, are the social the question, I guess, the main question is there a, I'm getting tongue-tied here. You're saying what are the social structures that contribute to maybe some of the issues, the problems in these kinds of services, and then how can they be addressed through that would be part of your project.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
So and as you've thought about various theories that relate to that issue, what are some of the theories, the principles, the models, whatever term you want to use that you've looked at so far that maybe apply?
Well, I have looked, first of all, the overarching one is international migration.
Okay.
And then under that is the neoclassical, which is an older theory that was first identified dealing with the macro and the micro aspects of migration, where it dealt with, first of all, people migrate for labor because there is a labor shortage in the receiving countries. And then the micro aspect of that neoclassical theory is the need that people move because they need to improve their economic status. And so the cost of moving and all of that is netted off in their expected higher wages when they arrive in the new country.
Okay.
That's the first theory. And the second is the networking, how you can now bridge those gaps with finding either support systems, other people who would have come here, people from your own country who would have come here. So those are some what I'm at least contemplating at this point.
Okay. So I was just kind of thinking of, the sub questions, and I don't have your proposal here in front of me, but if you were thinking of, say, looking at the neoclassic principles, you might want to look at that and just give the reader some background on what that terminology means, the neoclassic theory in relationship to immigration. That might be a part of your literature review, and that would be a research question. How do the principles of neoclassic approach on immigration, do those still apply, and if so, how? We don't want a yes/no question, but how do those principles still apply? And then you would want to say same thing with networking. Networking is another theory area that could be addressed, and how can some of the principles of networking be applied within the context of immigration? And so you may have a whole section on, we talk a lot at BGU about collaboration, about networking, and we have a lot of literature that relates to those topics of networking and collaboration. So it seems to me that would be at least two parts of your research question, your sub-research questions that would apply.
Okay.
How does the neoclassic model apply, and then how does some of the recent works in terms of collaboration, networking, how do some of those principles apply to the whole problem of lack of services, immigration, etc., from the Caribbean.
Okay.
So
Thank you so much,
feedback.
Dr. Payne.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Others would like to contribute to that. Okay, I'll just make another general statement. I think we've said this several times, but it's good to repeat. Okay, you've got a main question that you're working with in a research. Okay, it's kind of related to your problem statement in some way. And then the other we'll call them sub-research questions could deal with, you know, how extensive is a particular problem, if you're going to do some research on that issue. What are specific theories, models, approaches that you find in the literature that might be applied to the particular situation that you're dealing with? And then, you know, I always like, and of course we have the biblical issue. I always include the biblical issue in the research questions. What biblical principles seem to apply to the whole issue of immigration? And then, you know, a final research question when we get into whatever the transformational strategy is going to be is what kinds of strategies could begin to apply in order to begin to address this issue. So, yeah, I kind of laid those out in the template, you know, the areas that the research questions should be addressing. They're addressing, you know, the problem, how extensive it is, whatever you want to ask about the problem. It's asking about the various theories and models that could be applied to that issue, the biblical principles, and then finally, the practical strategy that you're going to apply. I mean, those are the four big areas that I like to see in terms of the kind of work that we're doing here at BGU.
Okay, thank you.
I would just like to comment on Celicia's work. And as I've reviewed your work, I have found that you have been consistent and clear in terms of your focus. And I'm not familiar with the theory of international migration myself, but as I look at it, one of the sub theories within that theory, and I think that is where your focus is given what I've seen of your work, is the concept of migrant networks.
Okay.
So as you look at the theory, that is the area I think that answers to the question, your major question, which is what social structures are available to women who have, and I've put the context, who have migrated to the USA from the Caribbean. That I know is your major question. And then a sub-question coming out of that question is, it could be worded this way: to what extent are these migrants aware of the support system that is there? Well, one, first of all, we'd have to look at what are the support systems available.
Yes.
And related to that would be looking at the migrant networks. What migrant networks are available? What are the support systems? And how is that system communicated and made available to the new migrants? How can they access the support that is there? Because there is support. There are different levels of support, but how are they able to access the support that is there? So that is what I think of as I think of your work. But I think your focus is pretty clear, and I would say that you're on the right track.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Henry. I appreciate it.
Okay. Others like to join in?
Dory. I have a question. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Dory.
My question is, so I'm planning to do a focus group, and I'm wondering, so one of the things I'm looking at is how counseling improves well-being, and I've taken, there is well-being theory that Martin Seligman developed, and it has 5 constructs. Improve relationships. I'm just going off the top of my head, but increased relationships, satisfaction with life, certain things like that. So would it make sense, or is it too big of a stretch as I conduct the focus group to then look at the answers through that lens? Are those answers, what I'm hearing in the focus group, could I put them in the lens of those 5 constructs of well-being theory, or am I making too big of a stretch to put those 2 things together?
I'd like to respond to that, Dory, having just looked at your chapter 3. But what you propose to do does fit. That's what I saw as I look at your chapter 3. It fits in with what, yes.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
Tell me again, Dory, what is the main question in your, I mean, I know you were being, some of the problem was how theology and theological approaches and psychological approaches, and how do you marry those approaches together? Tell me again, what is your main question?
So my main question, I feel really in the dark because I don't have my computer or my paper or anything in front of me.
Okay.
But I'm writing to 2 audiences, churches and counselors, and how can they collaborate toward holistic healing. So I'm going to look at a church counseling center, but I also want to just look in general about collaboration to promote a more holistic model of healing in a community.
Okay. And in your mind, how does the concept of well-being relate to both of those constructs, theological constructs and psychological?
Well, so I'm looking at improved well-being through well-being theory, the lens, and I'm going to gather different pastors who are already sending people to counseling and do a focus group with them to determine what have they noticed, what are the things they're seeing. So those were my questions. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. The focus group would be with the pastors or with the counselees?
No, pastors
with the
who are currently sending people, instead of doing the work themselves, they're referring to us. And then it's a sort of, okay, so what have you noticed? How can we partner? What's working? What's not working? That kind of a thing.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I guess I'm kind of still playing on the concept of well-being. From a psychological point of view, you just mentioned some of those concepts. I think you mentioned 5 that would be appropriate, related. From a theological point of view, we of course use the big word shalom, and so we would begin to dissect that word and what does that really mean in terms of the whole being, the holistic, and of course you're working for a holistic approach from a psychological point of view and from a theological point of view, and then you're relating that, you're using the term well-being and that whole theory to possibly bring together some of those theological and psychological constructs. Would that be accurate?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah, so that makes sense.
Professor Payne, this is Christina. My
ahead.
question would be on the schedule in case I want to graduate by the end of 2020, so not in June. So what would be the deadline for the academy committee, etc.? Because I need to add it to the end of my project paper.
Okay. You're looking, if you were going to graduate at the end of 2020, say in December? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'd have to look at that schedule. We probably don't even have that schedule in the book yet. But okay. Normally, if you're going to graduate in June, we want to have the proposal to the academic council by June of the previous year.
Mm-hmm.
So if you wanted to say get your degree in December, we'd probably just move that, just kind of go proportionally somewhere September, October, November. You'd want to make sure that you've got your proposal to the academic cabinet.
Mm-hmm.
So I would probably aim, if you could get that to the cabinet, say this year by September, then you would be in fairly good order, I think, to then graduate, work on your project, etc., and have that all ready for a December reception of your degree. We don't actually do a graduation ceremony, but we do issue degrees at that time.
Okay.
So yeah, I would say September, October, that time frame.
Thank you.
That's probably going to be my path too. So thanks for that question, Christina.
Okay.
Dr. Payne, I was just wondering if you could speak for just a minute, kind of a housekeeping issue, but what we need to be turning in at the end of this week. It's a chapter 3, but maybe speak about the gap or the difference or what we need to be doing between the submission at the end of this week and then the end of the course, because you'll have essentially the 3 completed chapters. Are you looking for us in those interim weeks to be refining, to be tweaking or working on your guidance? Can you just speak to that a little bit about what we need to be focusing on in that gap period between the end of this week and the end of the course?
Yeah, I think, of course, how much work you're going to have in that period between now and say March 24th, I think is when the final project is due. It really depends on, how much you've done so far on that. I mean, if you've not included at least 20 sources in your literature review, you'd want to make sure that you have at least 20 sources, that you've talked about 20 sources in your literature review before you turn that project in for the class. You would be getting, we'll be making some comments. Dr. Henry has been kind of looking at the methodology chapter this week. She had sent me at least three of the chapters that were done by different students, and I'll give my input, and then we'll put those on the course site. So yeah, I guess it's basically, if you've really gotten everything done in a pretty substantial manner, then you're going to be you won't have quite as much to do over that next couple of weeks after this week. In your case, if I remember correctly, Anthony, I'd said you may need to streamline the, say, chapter 1 a little bit. You may need to look through that and see if there's any places that you might be able to summarize more. You may or may not be able to do that. It used to be for the academic cabinet didn't want to see a proposal that was much over 25 to 30 pages, okay? We've expanded the literature review since that time, and we're asking for a lot more detail, I think, say in the research methodology chapter. So now I've told the academic cabinet you should probably expect proposals somewhere in the range of, they could be anywhere from 35 to 45 pages, could go to 50. And so I got, those are just kind of guidelines, I guess, in terms of length. But again, just make sure that you've looked at all the comments that either I've made or Dr. Henry's made, and you've incorporated those comments in that proposal. Once we look at the proposal one more time at the end of the course, we may have additional feedback, which you can then, use to work through the proposal again, and then you'll be talking with a supervisor that you will hopefully have selected by that time, and who will also possibly have some other recommendations. Yeah. But by March 24th, I'm looking for a fairly complete proposal based on what you've been able to do in this course. Again, it's not a complete, possibly not complete yet, because you need to wrestle through that a little bit more with your own supervisor, and then have something that you feel will be representative of what you want to do as you turn that into the academic cabinet. But yeah, long answer. Depends on what you've really gotten done, I guess, over these 9 weeks, how much more work you're going to have to work on that proposal over the next few weeks.
Well, I still have I've said before, I still feel like I have a ton of reading to do once the course is over. So I feel like I'm going to end up with this draft proposal that, as I read in the weeks to follow, is maybe going to morph a little bit more in consultation with my guiding professor.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah,
it won't.
Go ahead.
Well, for the course, it'll be done. In reality, I feel like there's still a lot of reading that needs to be done to shape it and finalize it.
Absolutely.
And I guess, is most of the reading done before I mean, when you get approval on your proposal from the academic committee, are you really then engaged in the writing and the research? So if the surveys or interviews, what have you, is it typical then that the student is really no longer focused on the reading or the absorption of literature? They're really face into their research effort at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I'm wrestling with that question myself in terms of what we really should expect at the proposal stage in terms of the literature read. If I look at Cresswell's book, Cresswell will say for the proposal, you may have, he may say, and of course he's looking for the PhD, he may say you may have a 20 to 25 page literature review. He may say, as you get into the final writing of the project, that literature review may be up to 40 or 50 pages. So as I look at, say a Cresswell who's been at it for a number of years, he obviously is looking to see, he's seen that there's going to be a lot more research reading literature research that's going to happen after the proposal stage. And I think I would agree with that. Yeah, I think there's going to be more reading. Sometimes you don't even know what to read until you even get into some of the research. Other questions may come up that you then have to go back to the books and begin to bring some other input into your project. Okay, as you're looking at the whole planning issue, some questions may come up as you're talking, say, with pastors that you hadn't even thought of, which then drives you back to the literature to see what kinds of models might apply to that particular question. So yeah, I think the reading and the research is an ongoing process, even as you're involved in the empirical research side of a project. You're going to always be driven back to the literature to find other answers to questions that start to arise.
Okay, thank you.
I think at the proposal stage, you may, and this is fine even at the class, if you even said in some particular part of your proposal, I believe this is an area I'm going to need to do more reading on, that's fine. Just say that, and I'll say, yeah, I think that's great. Then go for that. But yeah, for the class, it's a very at a draft stage, and you can even make comments like I just said. Yeah, I want to do more research in this particular area. The proposal that you submit to the academic cabinet, I probably wouldn't put a statement in quite like that, okay? they're going to just want to see that at that point you've at least looked at even a small representative sample of the literature, for example, and that you're showing at least you've been able to talk about at least 20 sources that are germane for your particular project. Yeah. All right. Others, go ahead.
I would just like to add, I agree with what Dr. Payne has just said. Ideally, at the proposal stage, in terms of the lit review, you should be honing your skill set to get to the most important pieces of literature. In every field of study, there are pieces of literature that are widely known. And ideally, and I stress the word ideally because the reality is that you may not at the proposal stage. But therefore, after the proposal stage, we do expect that alongside working on collecting the data, you will be doing further reading. So that's a given, that's understood.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think you should be anxious about that. Go right ahead and do that. And if in the process you find yourself going back to make changes in chapter 1, then you consult with your supervisor on the extent of the changes. But that is understood.
Let me just make another comment. I think it's happened to a few of you as you've gotten into the literature. For a few of you, your problem statement has started to change a little bit, and that's fine because you're being able to look at the literature. You're able to define the issues maybe a little more succinctly. There may be issues that you didn't even realize were a part of the problem, and you're able to bring those situations in. Like Lynn had the issue as she got into her situation with benefit corporations, wasn't even sure if benefit corporations had been around long enough to really get into the whole issue of transitioning for leadership. And so she's started to alter her problem statement even a little more. And a few of the others of you I know have done that. And so that's going to even happen. And that's fine.
Dr. Payne, Dr. Henry in class, this is Siobhan. I'm kind of, I don't know if I would call it at an impasse, but as I'm getting into the literature review, I've been reading a lot. I'm using Google Scholar. Thanks, Dr. Henry, for recommending that because I was using ProQuest. I'm coming across a lot of articles that are relevant, but I now have an issue as it relates to my context. And I know I had reached out to you, Dr. Dr. Payne, a little bit back, maybe about a week or so back, trying to settle in my context. My Central Kids pastor has resigned his role. And so I was kind of sitting saying, okay, I'm moving in the direction saying the context or area would be Gateway Church in Dallas, Fort Worth. But one of my classmates mentioned the education component. His wife is a second grade teacher. And so I've been exploring that a bit. We have several teachers because the church is pretty large. So we have several teachers at my church. And so I'm now at a point of, should I be moving this? Should I keep it in the direction of the church and look for another layer to try to get approval? Or should I be moving it from the aspect of childhood growth and development as it relates to education? So the impact of fathers with the childhood growth and development, kind of the education context. And so in exploring that, I dug out my work. When I did my master's, actually, I did it on establishing a charter school, which I, did it through the same program of schooling that I had done my undergrad with in computer programming. So I'm at a place of, gosh, I feel like I'm too far along. Why am I changing this? Or should I change it and begin interviewing teachers, or should I find a specific school in my city, or should I just keep trudging along and seek approval with my church and find out who the next layer is? Right now the position is posted, and so I don't even know who the next layer is.
Yeah, that is going to be a little tough. I suppose if your church is going to be going through some transition, that could create some problems for you. At least for me, when you're defining the context, that's then going to determine, the sample that you're going to work with. So if you're going to say change the context from your local church to a particular school, say a charter school, then, okay, you've got a few things of that context. You've got, say that charter school, what is the community it's located in, and you may, give some general demographics. And then in terms of the school itself, there may be some demographic information that would be relevant to that particular school setting, to those people. It's just helping your reader understand who is involved in your particular research. So yeah, if it's going to be a local church, then that, as I told you before, that's going to define the context the specific context. If you're going to go to a charter school, then of course that'll become the specific context. Like in a lot of things in the dissertation writing, you go from the broad to the narrow. In the context, you could say a few general comments about fathering, okay, just in a general comment, and you'd have some documentation on that issue. But then you start to narrow the focus down to a particular place that you're going to work with a sample of a particular population. So yeah, it's going to be your choice in terms of whether you want to focus on one or more charter schools or your church. And of course, then you have to deal with the issue of getting permission to be able to interview parents or students or whatever it happens to be. So you always have to take into consideration, what you will need to do in order to be able to get permission to do the kind of research that you'd like to do within a particular context.
Thanks, Dr. Payne. Even as I wrote it out, I think one of the submissions I gave you was, I know that even at the church, I would have to have permission because, as it relates to the kids as well as it relates to the parents, in addition to the overarching permission of, being able to utilize the church. So on all points, whether it's the school or church, it would be yes.
Yeah, that's true. And again, there's two aspects of that permission. Number one is permission from the leadership to say, do research within a congregation or a school. Number two is when we get into, there's an ethical section in the research methodology chapter, which addresses the fact that if you are working with, say, children under 18, you will need to use a consent form. And, we have what we call our institutional review board, and we review proposals that fit particular criteria. So if you're working with students, or say students under 18, your research will automatically fit the issue of a, quote, vulnerable population, okay? And of course, the federal government here in the US has laid out, pages and pages of guidelines and regulations that we must follow. And so, working with children under age 18 fits that category. So you'll have to have a consent form for each student or parent that is giving any kind of information. And they, you have to sign off on that they've given written permission for you to be involved in. So those are the two levels. The first level is just getting leadership approval, whether it's your church or a school. Number two is the individual consent forms that you'll need to work with for students or parents or whoever it is that you might be interviewing or involving in a survey.
Okay. And so another question then, so as I if I am shifting, or if I do consider shifting towards the school, my research then can't be just the intentional fathering or the childhood growth and development. It has to be the academic component of it. Like there are articles that I've been coming across that focuses on on fathering involvement in the child's development academically. And so does that need to be the research, or can it still stay the way that I've been having it? Because I don't know.
Yeah, I'll just say a couple of words, and maybe Dr. Henry can give, because her specific area is coming out of education. In terms of, you were working with, how fathering relates to child development, okay? At the academic level, if you're going to, one of the specific components you're going to use for development is their academic progress and how that is related to fathering. If there's any kind of a correlation, you would maybe be looking for that. And I could, I could ask Dr. Henry. She's very good at identifying the variables within a particular study. So in either one of those kind of settings, whether you're going to do it within the educational setting or a church setting, I don't know if that would change the variables, Dr. Henry, as you think about that.
Well, and even as Dr. Henry is thinking about that, one of the questions that kind of sparked for me was that I was more so thinking of childhood growth and development. Now that it's shifting academically, I know so many kids that have soared whether the father was in the house or not. So I feel like I'm now approaching it again with a different bias if I look at it like this, because it just feels different. That I don't know then what my, obviously focus questions, everything else would need to change. But I'm already recognizing some of the different biases that are showing up, because I know people who have done very well, and so it's a bit of a challenge. Yeah, Dr. Henry?
Okay, several things. Well, I'm glad you mentioned your bias towards the end, because then that explains why you seem to have a struggle in terms of moving the context into education. I know you started out with wanting to look at the relationship between fathering. I'm using the word fathering. I don't think you use that word, and don't be confused by it. But the relationship between fathering and childhood development. Well, the thing about childhood development is that that's pretty broad. Childhood development is defined psychologically and socially. And because we are working in a faith-based context, you could also look at it from a spiritual perspective. So if you stayed with childhood development, that's broad. However, if you narrowed it down to the relationship between, or the impact of father presence or fatherhood and a child's educational achievement, then you would have a more manageable study. Because then you would be dealing with just two variables, fathering or father presence and educational achievement. Of course, educational achievement has to be defined, but that's a pretty manageable kind of research. And I know there is in the research literature, you are going to find a lot to build on, whether, regardless of your bias. And as I said, I'm glad that you mentioned your bias, because there is an assumption that may not hold up, that father absence leads to poor educational achievement. That may not hold up, it may hold up. The purpose of research is to be transparent and to let the data speak for itself.
But so Dr. Henry, because of my bias, I'm still wanting to validate fathers, but I feel like I know so many people that have done so well, and so how do I balance that and marry that in a culture that seems like, or maybe fathers seem to be diminished in so many different ways, or maybe not as, I don't know. So I'm trying to think it out.
Okay, here's the issue. And that's why I used the word fathering just now.
Yes.
In general, as soon as we hear the word father or mother, we think of the biological component.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very important. However, the concept of fathering is more than the biological component.
Yes, yes.
And so it is
Yes.
true, and I know that from personal experience within my own extended family structure, that you may not have a biological father present, but you have experienced positive fathering role models.
Yeah.
And that has brought stability to your life and success. So you have to, like I said, I'm glad you identified your bias, because I was wanting to remember the research, the purpose of research is not to prove anything. The purpose of research is to discover. It's about discovery. So regardless of your bias, and that's why it's important at the beginning of your research, you identify your assumptions / bias. Regardless of your bias, you must let the data speak. So it may be that at the end of the day, depending on the context, and context does play a role in terms of the data that you will get, but given your context, you may very well find that father absence does not negate a child's educational experience because of some other factors that you will learn from as you do the research.
Wow.
There's
So
an
I'm
issue.
not trying to prove anything. I'm letting the data speak for itself.
Exactly, and I know I've listened to you over and over in the process of the course, and that word "prove" has been there, and you're not the only one. Your research is not to prove; it's to discover.
Wow, thank you.
One thought, though, that did come to me, Siobhan, is that you said you kind of have a purpose. You would like to validate fathers, right? I mean, that was part of your purpose. So that could be a bias, actually, that could skew the research, because you may have a hidden agenda of wanting to validate fathers so much in a particular way that you want the research to help validate them in their role, right? I don't know if that would be an issue.
I think so, but the way she described it, I mean, it helps.
Something that just struck me too, though, and I'm not sure if you even want to get into this, that as you look at the roles of fathering and mothering, and as Dr. Henry said, those aren't necessarily just biological. Yeah, they are biological roles, but we know from our own experience that different people can play both mothering roles and fathering roles in the life of people, in addition to or even as a substitute for the biological mother-father. If you really want to get into something, you may even want to see what exactly is the difference between what is contributed to a child's life in terms of the mothering role and what's contributed by the fathering role. Then you'd have to determine what you want to do with that kind of information in relationship to other variables that are possibly dependent on those roles.
So that takes the bias away to some degree. The biases are still there, but it softens the approach.
The validation in that case is that for the father, through your research, you're going to try to determine what is it that fathering contributes to a child's life as compared to what does mothering contribute to a child's life.
If I may be allowed to comment on that, Dr. Payne,
Mm-hmm.
that would be taking the research in another direction.
Okay.
I think the focus needs to be on father and fathering, and rightly so.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I say I'm glad you identified your bias, because what you're going to have to do is, I think you're going to have to work very hard to put aside your bias, because you don't want to use your bias as what you want to avoid is to gather data that fits your bias. Then that's not research, that's something else. So you have to be able to identify your bias, put it aside, and let the research speak for itself.
But how do I, even in the bias and letting the research speak for itself, and at the end, there may be a conclusion that there is little to no impact on a child's educational success or whatever, but they are still, I mean, however that turns out, how do I keep the peace of, or do I even just start fresh? Because I was looking at the father's blessing and, you know, the whole, I mean, I, of course, had written in a social fathering as well, so it didn't have to be biological. And it almost feels like I am starting over.
No, you are not starting over. What you are struggling with is the extent to which your bias has colored your approach. That's what you're struggling with. So that is a struggle. But I would recommend, and that's okay, that happens. Mm-hmm. Keep your focus on the literature. Allow the literature to speak to you in terms of the issues, the variables. Follow the literature wherever it leads. And at the end of the day, in your chapter 5, you could confess that you started out the research with a certain bias, but the literature has shown differently. That's possible, right? So that I think is where the struggle comes. But it's good that you're aware of that bias and how it's interfering with the process of going forward in the research.
Thank you. Thank you both.
I wanted to just jump in one more time, if I could, real quick. As a shout out, I don't know if anybody else has run into this, but using Google Scholar, I've hit a wall at times where I can see the article, but I can't access it. And I've tried a number of different ways, and a couple of them have been very important articles. So I just reached out to Jennifer Ronan for help. I said, I can't find these. And I gave her a list, actually 10 to 15, and she was great. She found most of them for me and sent them back to me. She didn't confess her magical secrets on how she got that, but I just wanted to say thanks and offer that to other students if they've struggled. She's a great resource. And the second thing, getting back to the 20 sources, I know we talked about 2 reference lists, one you've read, one you plan to read. Can you just say again, are the 20 sources we need to have, are they the 20 specifically tied to your research? Are they the 20 tied to your literature review? And are they the present read, excluding the future read, or are they the present and the future read? Any clarity you could add would be great. Thanks.
I would think that the 20 must be what you have already looked at and used, definitely. And then, as we say, the other section is the research that you're going to look at later. But that 20 should be what you've looked at now.
And so in my case, that 20 is, I guess I'm assuming it's 20 pieces of literature, research studies, critical thinking literature related to the specific issue I'm interested in, which is really assessing the planning situation, planning spectrum process at the local church level. So it's really not tied to the broader, that 20 isn't part of the broader theoretical framework or other topics that I'm looking at. So it's not works related to asset-based community development or theology of work, or in my case, healthcare planning or biblical basis for planning. Am I asking the question in a way you can respond? Is the 20 specifically focused on my primary research topic, which is planning in the local church, studies, critical articles on the state of planning, the planning process in the local church?
It is related to all those things you just listed.
Okay.
As part of the study. It's
Okay.
related to all those things.
That's not a problem then. This is one of the things I've come across in my literature review with the local church planning is the critical articles I'm finding are saying, may surprise you, but there's actually not a lot of literature out around this, and they call for more studies related to this. They call for people to step into it, which is both good and bad news. But it will also ultimately, I think, drive my research question a little bit. I haven't gone back and touched it, but I think that's going to flex just a little bit too. But I wanted to make sure I was understanding the 20 correctly. Thank you.
Yeah, I was going to just make a statement too in terms of the, let's see, and I'm sometimes having to mute some of you because I'm getting an echo. So if you end up being muted, it's because I muted you here because I was getting echoes. And when you talk, go ahead and unmute. If you stop talking, go ahead and mute. I think as we've already said, we said this a week or two ago because we've kind of gone back and forth of having, literature, potential literature, and then literature actually already has been cited. I think we've now landed on the fact we will end up having two lists. You'll have a reference list, which is, references that have actually been cited in the proposal, and then another separate list, which would become potential sources. The ones that you list in the reference list will be those that you've actually read in some enough to make some intelligent comments on, say, in the literature review. And if you cited literature in any other places, say in the problem statement, etc., then those would appear in the reference list. Other literature that you've really not been able to go into depth yet, and so you're not citing it at all in your proposal, will become part of a potential sources list. We'll just use that title. And those you may or may not really use in a documentation way in your final dissertation. But at this point, you've scanned those, you've seen them, you've looked at Google Scholar, you've looked at ProQuest, you've maybe read the abstract, you've maybe just scanned the article, and you think it might have some bearing on your particular project. You would then just put those sources in a potential sources list. Not necessarily saying that you're going to use them, but they are potential sources that could possibly be used by you in the future. And there again, if anybody talks, make sure you unmute yourself because I've been muting just to stop some of the echo.
I'm just going to say a quick note here, and that is to say, and hope you all take this well. I'm so glad to hear you're all struggling. I sometimes start believing I'm the only one who's having any trouble doing all of this. So it's honestly helpful to hear that this is it's a struggling process, and that's the way it's supposed to be. So thank you for that.
Okay, well, we've spent a little over an hour. Are there any other pressing questions that someone would like to get in before we close down the session today? Okay, if you think of things, of course, you can email either Dr. Henry or myself, and we can try to answer issues as they come up. You don't have a discussion forum this week. I wanted to give you as much time as possible just to be working on the proposal. And again, March 24th is when we're trying to get your final project in. It's to your advantage, though, as if you can get the research chapter in, you know, to this week or next week, sometime before you have to turn in the final project, you will at least be able to get feedback from myself, Dr. Henry. If you don't turn those in before you turn in your final project, then you just don't have the advantage of having feedback. So it's really up to you. You know, I'd like to see you get something in the research methodology section, you know, this week, next week. Before you have to get that final project proposal in by March 24th. But I will leave that to all of you as you're working through time schedules, etc. Okay, I was just taking a look at the chat room here to make sure that there's nothing else that we're missing here. All right, and yeah, I'll just reemphasize what Dr. Henry said. If you are having trouble getting at sources when you get a message that, you know, you just can't get at it because it's part of a subscription-based service, etc. Our librarian, Jennifer Roman, is just excellent and so helpful. I've done the same thing and given her a list of sources, and she just is amazing. I'm not sure how she does that either, but she many times can get you access to something or give you a PDF of something that you've not been able to find. So do take advantage of Jennifer's services because she is just great. All right, with that, I think we will go ahead and close down the session. Again, I just continue to pray God's wisdom. The Bible says if you lack wisdom, you can ask the Lord for it, and he will give it without reproach. James 1 talks about that, and I think that applies to dissertation work as well. So keep asking the Lord and just keep being diligent to press forward. And like I say, things may change on you, and that's fine. Even the problem statement may change. If you go to a totally different problem statement, that may be. Once you submit your proposal to the academic cabinet with a particular problem and approach, you would be held to that unless you want to resubmit that proposal. And that's happened at times. Students have submitted a proposal to the academic cabinet, gotten it approved, and then it changed so dramatically that I felt like it needed to go back to the academic cabinet. If you make minor changes in a proposal and the approach or some of those issues, then I, as the director of dissertation projects, am able just to kind of give you approval of that. But if I think you're making a major change to your proposal after you've had that submitted and approved by the cabinet, then I will need to ask you to resubmit it to the academic cabinet so that we as a whole cabinet can look at that and make sure that it seems to fit all the right criteria, etc. All right, with that, I'm going to close up shop, and thank you for making the time to be with us today. Blessings on you all.
Goodbye and blessings to you all.
Goodbye, thank you.
Okay.
I know.
Thank you. Thank you.